Okay, good morning, everyone. And we'll talk about the Parsha that we're going to read this upcoming Shabbos. It's called Parsha Pinchas. And we'll also talk about today, which is yesterday and today are special days. We mentioned it last week. Today is Yud Gimel Tammuz, the 13th day of the month of Tammuz. And the 12th and the 13th day of the Hebrew month of Tammuz is a special day, a holiday, because it's the day the previous Rebbe, the father-in-law of our Rebbe, was liberated from prison in Russia, communist Russia. In the 1920s, he was arrested for teaching and spreading Yiddishkeit, Judaism, Jewish life, for strengthening Jewish life in Russia by creating these hundreds of underground schools and synagogues and mikvahs when it was outlawed by the communists. And the communists hunted down and pursued the counter-revolutionaries. Anyone who was religious was like a counter-revolutionary, and arrested them and tortured labor camps, and many of them were killed. And the previous Rebbe was behind this whole effort to strengthen Jewish life. And eventually he was arrested himself, and he was thrown into prison, and he was there for like 2.5 months. There was this big fear, almost certainty that he would be killed, as the Russians did with whoever they thought stood in their way. And there was prayers around the world. Once word got out that the previous Rebbe was the leader of world Jewry that time. So people prayed hard, and different governments, including the United States government, intervened. And eventually he was let free. And he was let free on the 12th of Tammuz. He was notified that he's free to go on the 12th of Tammuz, which was yesterday. So yesterday is the big holiday. But because it was a Russian holiday at the time, that day, so there wasn't anyone there to sign the papers, to release the previous Rebbe. So he stayed another day until the 13th of Tammuz, when they signed the documents to allow him to leave. And he basically was told that even though he's free, that they would be watching every step that he makes. And that pretty much forced the previous Rebbe to leave Russia. And he made his way out of Russia to Poland and Latvia, and eventually to the United States. He came to America in 1940 and established Jewish life here in America. And that's where Chabad flourished in the last 10 years of the previous Rebbe's life. And then with the Rebbe stepping in a year later, under the leadership of the Rebbe. So Yud Gimel Tammuz is a big holiday, because it's a miracle that such vile people, nevertheless, the previous Rebbe came out alive. The previous Rebbe wrote a diary, actually. He was a prolific writer. Besides for writing Torah, commentary on Torah, and Hasidic commentary called Ma'amorim, Hasidic treatises. He also wrote a diary, and he wrote about Hasidic life from the early generations. He was a very, very fantastic writer, and his diary it's in English. If you go to Chabad.org, you can read it. It's a mind-blowing, beautiful, inspiring diary. How, when he was arrested, and he was there was the KGB, I guess was equivalent of the FBI today.
It was ЧК,
NKVD.
ЧК, НКВД, KGB, and in one, I believe it was ЧК.
But I know there was other. And this is Alex talking. Alex is sitting here. I know there was the NKVD is NKVD, but there's also the Evsektia. The Evsektia was a division within the secret police in Russia, or whatever they call it, just to deal with the Jewish problem, with people who were practicing Jews. And these were, and the people, and this is the shocking thing, the people who were headed this department were Jewish communists, were Jews, born Jewish, grew up Jewish, and became and bought into this communist propaganda. And they became violent and fierce advocates for communism, and they were in the forefront of trying to stamp out traditional Judaism.
He was not only one. There were a lot of people like him.
Yes,
A
lot of the Jewish communists, yeah.
But many of them at some point they somehow recalled that they are Jewish and did something right.
And the irony is that Stalin even killed these Jewish communists, even the communists who were doing his dirty work. Stalin turned on them too, eventually. And there is, I remember reading a story where this very high-level Jewish communist had a baby child, had a baby boy, and either his mother, who was a traditional Jew, or his mother-in-law, whatever, his wife's mother, insisted that the baby have a bris, circumcision. But it was outlawed, and this was a general in the Communist Party or whatever, a high-ranking official. So they had to make it, very clandestinely, that even the father wouldn't be present, the communist father wouldn't be present, and it was done like, have the mohel come very secretly, middle of the night, and do the bris. So when the previous Rebbe was arrested, I'll just give you in short, because the diary, again, if you go to Chabad.org, if you go to Chabad.org, you can read the diary in English. Fascinating. The diary tells the story where the previous Rebbe writes that when he was arrested, and there was great fear amongst his family and the Hasidim that were there. He was arrested like 3 a.m. in the morning. They came to arrest him. He made a very, very strong resolution. And the resolution was that he would not betray any fear. He would not betray any fear to these thugs, to these police, to the authority, the communist people who arrested him. And it manifested itself in many different ways. There was a protocol. The arrestee, the prisoner, when would have to stand when he's given instructions. They did everything to strike fear into the prisoners' hearts. They would interrogate them, and there was no rules. So they would persecute and interrogate. The previous Rebbe, for example, he would not stand when he was spoken to. He would only answer in Yiddish. He would not answer in Russian, even though he spoke a fluent Russian. In general, he came across fearless because he was fearless. He had such strong faith in God that he was fearless because he knew what he did was the right thing. What he was doing was the right thing, and these were evil people. At some point in the interrogation, the story goes, he writes that one of the interrogators got very, very frustrated with him not sharing any information with them because they wanted to know who was his team, who was his army of students of Chabadniks that were carrying out his work, opening up these schools everywhere in all these cities and towns. But the previous Rebbe would not speak. He wouldn't say anything. He wouldn't tell them anything. So at some point, one of the interrogators took out a gun, pistol, and put it on the table where the previous Rebbe was sitting. And he said to him, he said, "This little toy makes many people talk who don't want to talk." Basically threatening him. If he doesn't talk, they would shoot him. And the previous Rebbe answered that this little toy can only frighten someone who believes in many gods and only one world. But as a Jew, I believe in one God and two worlds, this world and the world to come. This little toy doesn't frighten me. The one thing that the previous Rebbe asked and begged them is because when he was arrested, he brought his tefillin with him so he can put on tefillin. And on the books, the Russian, constitution, whatever they call it there, allows for religious liberty. Even when the communists were killing anyone who had any connection to Judaism and practiced Judaism, on the books it was all nice and dandy and nice and clean. So the previous Rebbe said he insisted, according to the law, they should give him his tefillin so he can pray. But they wouldn't allow him to put on tefillin. They wouldn't allow him to put on tefillin. For the previous Rebbe, this was very, very heartbreaking. And previous Rebbe writes that at some point when he was led to an interrogation room, so they had to go from one floor to the next floor. So the guard that led him from wherever he was to the interrogation room was going in front, and previous Rebbe was behind him, walking up the steps. And previous Rebbe felt that this is the only chance he'll have to put on film because the guy was ahead of him and didn't see. So he quickly took out his film as he was walking up the steps, and he quickly put on the tefillin. And at some point, the guard turned around and he saw the previous Rebbe wearing phylacteries, tefillin. And he went into a rage. He started cursing at the previous Rebbe, and then he gave him such a strong kick that the previous Rebbe fell down all the stairs. And he wasn't a young man at the time. And he got very, very hurt. This big wound on his foot. But obviously there was no doctors there or nothing. He would just have to pick himself up and continue walking. And he actually suffered from that for the rest of his life. This wound that he had in his leg from being thrown down the stairs by this guard. Eventually, so at first, the decree was that the previous Rebbe should be put to death, shot. Then there was mounting pressure, world pressure, so they reduced it to 10 years in hard labor. And then there was continued mounting pressure, so they freed the previous Rebbe, but they didn't free him to go home. They let him free to go home for about 6 hours, and then he would have to go to this exile, into this godforsaken town called Kostroma. You ever heard of Kostroma, Alex? Yeah, it's a big city, a small city.
Not really big now. I believe it's about 300,000.
Okay.
200,000.
So it's a little city in
Russians.
right, and
Very long.
and the previous Rebbe was sent there for 3 years, and that was in the system, in the Russian penal system. They would do that. They would send people into exile, force them into exile. Exile then wasn't like today. There was no phones, and there was no faxes, and there was no Wi-Fi, and there was no Zoom that we're doing now, or WhatsApp. You were cut off from the world, cut off.
At that time, the exile like this, it was not something terrible. That, in 10 years, they sent everybody to Siberia, to Gulag.
Gulag, yeah. So the previous Rebbe arrived there in the city called so when they told the previous Rebbe he's free to go, it was on a Thursday. And they said you can go home for 6 hours, then you have to report, then you have to go to the train station and take this drive to and go to this exile, Kastrama. And the previous Rebbe asked, so if he gets on the train on Thursday, when will he arrive in the city Kastrama? And they told him he would arrive Saturday on Shabbos. So the previous Rebbe said that he's absolutely not agreeing to that, and he's not going to drive. He's not going to ride on Shabbos. On Shabbos, he's not allowed to ride, not a car, not a train, or whatever. And he said, I never violated the laws of Shabbos, and I'm not going to do it now. So the Russian communists didn't know what to do with him because they never had a situation where someone is told you're free to go, and he says, I'm not going. And they immediately consulted with their higher ups, and they said to them, just let it, allow him to be there another day. And so his liberation was pushed off from that Thursday until Sunday, where he was allowed to travel home. And so basically, the whole arrest and his liberation was not. He wasn't arrested for his personal religious observance. He was arrested because of his work to strengthen Jewish life for all. And so his being freed was almost like the communists were forced to back off and now not only allow him free, but allow him. They knew when they set him free what he would do. He would continue to strengthen Jewish life. So the forces of evil were instrumental in allowing for the previous Rebbe to continue his work. And in the first letter that the previous Rebbe wrote when he left, and he thanked God for this great miracle. By the way, one of the key individuals who was very instrumental with the highest officials in Russia, the highest communist officials, was a non-Jewish woman who was the head of the Red Cross at that time, forgetting her name. She wasn't Jewish, but somehow she took on this cause to put pressure and help the previous Rebbe go free. She was apparently a righteous woman. And you look up, if you read the history, which everything now is online, you'll see the name of this woman who was actually, she was close to Stalin or whomever, I don't know who was in charge then. And she had a strong role to play in the previous Rebbe being freed, as well as the President of the United States at the time. So the previous Rebbe writes that this wasn't just a personal miracle for him personally, but this was an affirmation from above, from God, a great miracle for the continued work of the previous Rebbe is to strengthen Jewish life. And when he left Russia, eventually when he left Russia on the train station, when he left, he said a few words, and he basically said that even though that we, the Jewish people, are in exile, we have to always remember that only our bodies, our physical bodies are in exile, but our souls, the neshama, is never subject to any exile, and no one can coerce us, to deter us away from who we are, spiritually. And that was how he lived, and that was his example, and that is the strength and the inspiration that we take from this day of Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz. But again, I encourage you to go online and read about it. It's fascinating, especially the diary of the previous Rebbe. He describes in great detail even how the prison looked and the rooms of the prison and the interrogators, how they would interrogate and how they would talk down to the prisoners and make them feel like they're worthless, and all in an attempt and to get them to sign false declarations, that they confess to this and confess to that, so they can have in the files that the prisoner confessed to counter-revolutionary work, and the previous Rebbe would not sign what he thought were lies, and they couldn't coerce him. Fascinating read. Okay, let's now talk about the Parsha. Give me 1 second. Let's talk about the Parsha. Just give me 1 second here. Actually, before we talk about the Parsha, I just want to talk about one interesting point that the Rebbe explains. This week, this upcoming week, is a fast day called Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. It's on Thursday of this week, the 2nd of July. Shiva Asar B'Tammuz is the 17th day of the Hebrew month of Tammuz. And it's one of the rabbinic fast days enacted by the prophets. And it's a fast day because it commemorates, it marks the day when the Babylonians breached the walls of Jerusalem, when they had the battle to destroy Jerusalem and the temple. It took them like 2 years, where they surrounded the walls of Jerusalem, and then the 17th of Tammuz they breached the walls of Jerusalem, and then 3 weeks later they burnt the temple. They destroyed the temple, which is Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the month of Av, which is 3 weeks after Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, the 17th of Tammuz. So Shiva Asar B'Tammuz is a fast day. We commemorate the destruction, and it actually begins a period called the 3-week period, 3 weeks between the 17th of Tammuz and Tisha B'Av and the 9th of Av, from when they breached the walls of Jerusalem until they destroyed the temple, they burned down the temple. It's called the 3 weeks Bein HaMetzorim, the 3 weeks of mourning. It's a time of mourning. There's no celebrations, there's no marriages, there's no even music. It's a sad time, commemorates a sad event. So for many years, the month of Tammuz was synonymous with this sad day of the 17th of Tammuz. And now, 100 years ago, this great miracle happens, and the previous Rebbe is liberated from the Russian prison. The previous Rebbe, again, wasn't a private individual. He was the Rebbe, he was the leader of world Jewry at the time, at a very difficult time in our history. And here we celebrate the Chag HaGeula. This is the holiday of the redemption, of the freedom that the previous Rebbe was given freedom. It's a joyous day. So the question is, which is it? Is the month a month that marks sadness and the exile, or is the month a time when there are celebratory days, when the days of redemption? How to reconcile both of these things in the same month? So in short, the Rebbe explains, as we talked about many times, as explained in Siddur, that the sadness and the destruction of the temple, which on the surface is something sad, something obviously sad, was the destruction of A, the destruction of the Holy Temple, and B, the subsequent diaspora of the Jewish people. So even though that on the surface it seems as a tragedy, But ultimately, the inner truth of everything that happens in this world, even the tragic things, even the sad things, are ultimately positive, constructive things. We know that because everything that happens with Hashem, from Hashem. Hashem orchestrates everything that happens in this world. So, and Hashem is the absolute good. So only good can come from Hashem. So the inner, if you're able to pierce the outer surface reality of things and delve into the true inner reality of things, so then even the bad stuff and the sad stuff is really positive. And this is this aligns with the idea that Yud Beis Tammuz is the holiday of celebration of freedom and liberation, because the exile and the liberation and the redemption are intertwined. The same way we explain in last week's Torah portion that we read yesterday, we read about the prophecy of Bilam. Bilam was the non-Jewish prophet who was hired to curse the Jewish people. And Hashem, the angel, instructs Bilam to go along and accept this task that he was asked to do, which is to curse the Jewish people. But Hashem said, the angel said in the name of God, that you will only allow to speak the words I put into your mouth, and the words that God put into Bilam's mouth were not curses, but they were actually blessings and prophecies of blessings, great prophecies of blessings. Hashem used Bilam to prophesize blessings to the Jewish people, and one of those prophecies is none other than the prophecy of the coming of Mashiach, where Bilam prophesies at the end of days there will be a star that will rise from Jacob and a ruler from Israel who will transform the world, the promise of Mashiach. And the question is, how odd it is that this prophecy of Mashiach in the Torah comes through Bilam, the evil prophet, the evil Russia, the evil wicked Bilam. So it's explained that actually there is a symbiotic relationship between good and evil, between darkness and light, even though on the surface they clash and they're opposites, obviously. But the inner truth of everything is light, not darkness. And the whole idea of Mashiach is the transformation of darkness into light. So we find in many different aspects of life, and as the Torah explains it, this very deep connection between evil and good, and how one can transform evil into good, darkness into light. Okay, so in the same way also, the month of Tammuz has both days, the 17th of Tammuz, which is a dark day, a day that commemorates the destruction, and Yud Beis Tammuz, the day that commemorates the redemption, the freedom of the previous Rebbe, and everything that represented and represents. Because the truth is that one leads to the other, or not that one leads to the other. Yud Beis Tammuz is before the 17th of Tammuz in how it falls out in the month. But Yud Beis Tammuz is the inner truth of the 17th of Tammuz, meaning that this sad day, if you bore and understand the deepest truth of this sad day, you'll see that it is something possible. The Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, gives an example of a king who cleanses the soil of a child, of his child, his baby child, that soils his clothes, his diapers, whatever, and the king cleans it. And the baby is crying when he does that, but it's an expression of love on the part of the king, who personally is attending to his child. In the same way, also, these manifestations of tragedy are on the deepest level not manifestations, but they're expressions of God's love. And when Mashiach comes, we will see it that way. Today, we don't see it that way, but just even the knowledge that the truth is such is what enables us to endure, what enables us to survive, so to speak, the difficult times. Okay, now Parshas Pinchas. So the end of last week's portion speaks about a grave thing that happened to the Jewish people when they were in the desert. That one of the leaders of the tribe of one of the families of the tribe of Shimon, one of the 12 tribes, brought forth a Midianite woman and openly challenged Moshe Rabbeinu by living with this Midianite woman. And this was an outrage because the Torah prohibited that. And there was one individual, his name was Pinchas, who was a grandson of the high priest Aaron, from that family. And he saw what happened, and he took it upon himself, and he killed the leader of the tribe of Shimon with this woman in the act of cohabitation, and he killed him. And so he came forward and he did that, and everyone was shocked that he did that until God spoke, and he said that by Pinchas stepping forward and avenging God's wrath, by doing what he did, he avenged God's wrath, and therefore God gave him the blessing of peace and the priesthood. So Pinchas was known as a kanoi. A kanoi is a zealot. He was zealous, and he was outraged when he saw this desecration on the part of the head of the tribe of Shimon, who brought this woman to openly defy and open defiance against Moshe Rabbeinu, and he took matters into his own hands and he killed him and her. The Talmud says that the rabbis were not happy with what Pinchas did, because it's not a Jewish thing to be zealous. Usually the people who are fanatics and zealots, these are dangerous people, right? You never know what can trigger them. So they actually looked down at Pinchas until God appeared, and God praised Pinchas's act and said that this was avenging God's honor. In other words, it wasn't an expression of a certain type of character that Pinchas had, that he was prone to being a fanatical zealot. No, Pinchas only had in mind God's honor. So if a person is a zealot because he's wired in such a way where he gets excited and this and that, that's not a good thing. That's a bad thing. But here Pinchas was touched and outraged because of what he saw this open defiance against Moshe and God, and therefore he took matters into his own hands. And he was rewarded for that. So what does that teach us? It teaches us several things. It teaches us Pinchas was not the leader. He wasn't a leader of the Jewish people at the time. He was a young man. He was the grandson of Aaron. Moshe was present at the time, and the elders were present. And Pinchas could have thought to himself that, if this is such an outrage, let the big boys step in and let them deal with it. Let Moshe and let the elders and let them step in and avenge God's honor. Like many of us, even if sometimes we're motivated to do something good, we can always we say to ourselves, if this really should be done, then let the better people do it. Why do I have to do it? Or who am I to step forward? But Pinchas didn't think along those lines. He saw that what needed to be done, and he saw that no one was doing it, so he stepped forward and he did what he had to do. So this is what we learn from Pinchas. Now, in this week's Torah portion, we read about God telling Moshe how he would not enter into the land of Israel because of what happened in last week's Torah portion when Moshe Rabbeinu hit the rock for the water that the Jewish people needed instead of talking to the rock. And Hashem said, because he didn't sanctify my name by performing this miracle, by speaking to the rock, and the rock would give out water, if that would have happened, everyone would have seen that it's an open miracle. But because Moshe hit the rock and didn't speak to the rock, so his punishment was he wouldn't enter into the land of Israel. And we talked about last week what exactly was the sin. I think we talked about it, but we're not going to get into it now because obviously Moshe Rabbeinu was not a sinner. He was a great leader. And even this was an act of selfless devotion to the Jewish people, which we'll talk about. Maybe I'll mention it later. So in this week's Torah portion, when God tells Moshe that he wouldn't enter into the land of Israel, so Moshe says, okay, he asks Hashem to appoint a new leader who would guide the Jewish people, who would, now that he would pass, who would lead the Jewish people. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, Yivchar Lanu Hashem, may God choose a man, Ish Asher Ruach Boy, a man of spirit, a man who has spirit within him. Some leaders are pragmatic leaders. They're good administratively. And some people have ruach. Some leaders have spirit. They're inspiring. They're inspired, and they in turn inspire others. So Moshe says to God, choose the kind of leader the Jewish people need is not a administrative leader, but someone who has spirit, who can inspire the people. That's the literal meaning of what Moshe Rabbeinu is asking. Rashi says, taken from the Talmud, what it means is, excuse me, what it means is, Ish Asher Ruach Boy, a man that has spirit. It means a man who can relate to the spirit of each individual in the community. In other words, there are two kinds of leaders. You have a leader who's so forceful, so dynamic, that I guess he leads by the strength of his personality. Then you have a leader who relates to every single individual as an individual. He relates to the individual and lifts up the individual. That requires a different kind of leader. I think I once shared with you the story that the metaphor, if you want to call it that, there was once a big competition in the forest amongst the animals. The competition was who could roar the loudest, which animal can belt out the loudest voice. So all the animals came forward and they yelled and they roared. And then the lion came and the lion gave a roar, and it was so powerful, so much stronger than all the rest, that it was obvious that the lion was king. But before they were going to award the lion with being the loudest roarer, a little teeny bird came forward and said, "Let me try." And everyone looked at this little teeny bird. All the animals looked at the little teeny bird and said, "What are you going to try? Are you going to compete with the lion?" And this was like I think it's called a nightingale bird, a bird that sings. And the bird began to sing and hum very beautifully. And slowly, all the animals around started to hum along because it was such a beautiful singing and melody. And before everyone knew it, there was such a loud chorus of everyone singing that even was louder than the roar of the lion. So you have some leaders who can roar loud with the force of their personality, and you have some leaders that can lift everyone up. And you have the weight of the whole community. So this is what Moshe Rabbeinu says: choose a leader that can relate to this, to the ruach, to the spirit of each and every one of the people. So the commentaries say that what was Moshe Rabbeinu saying? Moshe Rabbeinu saying is that even though the God blessed Pinchas, the zealot, and said that he saved the day for the Jewish people after the sin of the head of the tribe of Shimon cohabitating with this Midianite woman. Nevertheless, this is not the kind of leader that Moshe was asking for. Moshe was asking for a different kind of leader, not a zealot, but someone who actually is able to connect with people individually in a very individual way. Inspire everyone, correct. Someone once said about the Rebbe, Jonathan Sachs once gave a talk, and he said that many people think, or they would criticize the Rebbe, saying that the Rebbe was a leader, and he had all these followers, all these Hasidic followers, and and they were all followers. So he once said that after he got to know the Rebbe, he realized that good leaders inspire followers, but great leaders create other leaders, inspire leaders. Right? A leader that would inspire leadership in others. That's the ultimate. Okay. The other things in this week's parsha is something interesting. It talks about the different sacrifices that were brought in the temple, and this week's parsha also mentions all the different holidays and the sacrifices that they brought in the temple for those holidays. And what's interesting, as the commentators point out, that even though that this parsha is in the 3-week period of mourning, but we mourn the destruction of the temple, nevertheless, for us, the temple is eternal, and we believe in the rebuilding of the third temple. And the week when we usher in this mourning for the destruction of the temple, what do we read in the Torah? We read the part of the Torah that tells us about the different sacrifices that were brought in the temple, almost like a signal that Not to worry that the temple will be rebuilt, and once again, we will bring the sacrifices. But the first sacrifice that the Torah mentions is Korban Tomid. Korban Tomid was a sacrifice. In Hebrew, Korban Tomid means the constant sacrifice, the forever sacrifice. And this is the sacrifice that was brought every day and every afternoon in the temple. They brought a lamb, a sheep, and they brought it as a sacrifice. And this would open up the altar for the other sacrifices. And they would end the day with this sacrifice. And it's called Korban Tomid. The constant sacrifice, that was brought every single day, Tomid, constantly. So it's interesting. There's a Medrash. The Medrash says that they once asked the sages, which is the most important verse in the Torah? Which is the most important verse in the Torah? So one of the sages say, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Another one said, the first of the 10 Commandments, Anecha Hashem Lekecha, I'm the Lord your God. Then there's another sage that said, no, it's the verse in this week's Torah portion that talks about the constant sacrifice. Shnaim Layem Elo Samid. Twice a day they brought the offering, Tomid, always. So the question is, how can this verse be considered the most important verse in the Torah? What's so special about this verse? So the commentators explain that Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, the most important prayer that we have, is a prayer that declares God's oneness and sacrifice. Many Jewish people who were led to the slaughter would die with this prayer on their lips. Shema Yisrael, hear is the Lord our God, the Lord is one. So this is a moving prayer, a moving verse, and it inspires us, etc. Same is true with the first of the 10 Commandments. God declaring, I am the Lord your God. So these opinions are that these verses are so inspirational that they lift us up. The other opinion is, yes, inspiration is very important. And comes a holiday, or when we meditate about this and about that, we get inspired and we are lifted up. But the critical, important, and the most important thing is the constant, the continuity every single day, to live our lives every single day in accordance to the Torah and the mitzvahs and God's way. That's more important than even the occasional inspiring special moments that lift us up. To be able to weave that into your daily activity, to weave God into your daily life, as the prophet says, "B'chol drachecha de'ehu," know God in all your ways. Yes, you can study Torah and you do mitzvahs, but that's your time with God. But when it comes to your time with yourself, meaning how you live your life, your daily life, your work, your leisure, everything that you do should be a reflection of your connection to God. And that is the ultimate, the constant, the continuity is what's really important. Okay, these are just some thoughts on the Parsha. If anyone wants to ask anything or share, now is the time. Okay, if it's all clear, that's fine too. And we'll pick up next week. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
We'll pick up next week.
Oh,